Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles. I am delighted to be joined here with Delaney with her incredible documentary, Wallace. Can't wait to get stuck into this. But for those that haven't seen it, let's take a look at a brief clip.
When I was growing up, I just thought every town had whorehouses. I didn't know it was different. It was just the way it was.
Straight sex or half and half or whatever you chose to do. And she'd have, it was not a written menu, but she would give you options. But we were kids and we were poor, so we just did the $10 one most of the time.
Get their money, come back in the kitchen, put it in their box, set their timer. Then when their minutes were up, ding ding, and I was knocking.
It is amazing to have you here, and thank you for bringing Wallace to us. What a film! Like, who knew? But for those that haven't seen it, tell us a brief synopsis of your film.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I get very excited when I get to share the film with an audience, because it's such a strange topic, and I like to hear people's reactions. But it is about this it's about a tiny town in Idaho called Wallace, where brothels were open and very much ingrained in the community up until 1991. So it focuses on the people who lived in that community, live in the community, and a lot of people who worked in the brothels as maids or sort of grew up with them very much at the center of the community.
Well, I mean, the crazy thing is that there's a lot of these small little towns in America, and I kind of like love this small little town and what you captured on film. So I want to go and just go into a coffee shop and hang out with these people. Like, I just love it. But then there's this other element. You're like, it's amazing. You wouldn't have known this existed for so many years, and that it went on till 1991. But how did you discover this, and where did the inspiration come for you? Where you're like, I've got to tell this story.
Yeah. I had been given this book. It's called Atlas Obscura, and it's basically, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like a bunch of little roadside attractions all over the world.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I would check it out if you haven't. And I read about this Oasis Bordello Museum, and it was like, here is this museum where it hasn't been touched since the FBI raid in the late 80s. So everything is as is. The same NyQuil bottles, like the shampoo in the bathrooms, like it's all they're left as the girls left them when they were running away from the FBI. And I was like, this sounds fascinating. And I was super fortunate that when I dug a little bit deeper and I reached out to the Chamber of Commerce in Wallace, I was put in touch with this local historian, Heather Brandstetter, who ended up being the producer on the project with me. And she did her dissertation on, and eventually wrote this book called Selling Sex in the Silver Valley, on the brothels in her town and on Wallace and how prostitution affected Wallace and just the entire town. So she basically was like, oh, it goes much deeper than this museum. There's actually 5 brothels. One's an Airbnb, turned into an Airbnb hotel, which is where we stayed during shooting. One is as it was, but completely shut down. And one is this museum, and the other ones are still there, but they're different buildings. So I was like, wow. So I sort of immediately, when I went up there, she was like, it's a lot, there's such a rich history here, and it's not just the museum. So fortunately, is one of those great things I think happens in documentaries sometimes and it was fortunate that I was like, oh, wow, like this story is bigger and even more complex and complicated, which was a challenge than I thought it would be.
Well, what was fascinating, watching this film is that, you managed to get a lot of people give their perspective, reaction. And, it was quite immensely like a mixed bag of reactions, and it was quite fascinating seeing how everybody saw it differently as well. And obviously there were some people that partook, and there was some people that were kind of against it, or some people that accepted it but weren't part of it. And it was really great how you captured these conversations. Now, I'm just so curious, as a documentary filmmaker, this may be a little bit uncomfortable for maybe to try and find subjects and obviously talk about certain things. Yeah. How was that experience for you?
What happened, it was awkward. It was awkward too, I was talking to these 60 to 70-year-old men about sex with prostitutes, but it was not even weird for them. And it was so customary. It was such a part of their history. And I was lucky that I had Heather, because she sort of acted as a fixer. And these were the people she grew up with, because she grew up in Wallace. These were her parents' friends. These are people that she was on the board of some of the museums and the history museums and just local records that they hold in town, mining museums. So she made them feel comfortable, and I was very lucky to have her. And I always think it's so great to have a fixer anywhere, just so you don't feel like here's this outsider exploiting you. Like she very much like helped me gain their trust. And I never, I think most documentarians you don't ever want to feel like you're exploiting anyone or like all of your trust, and then you're going to go and like make it look so like they didn't say anything on screen. So I was super conscious of that. And I think because Heather was so gracious and so in this town, it made me even more hyper aware and hypersensitive to like preserve, these people's not only anonymity, but also like make sure that I wasn't putting them in a poor light and sort of just showing them how they were.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was incredible that you obviously journeyed and some of the things, obviously some places there's still things in place, and there's that kind of very kind of eerie feeling of just all this history that has gone on behind these walls. And, I thought, I mean, it's horrible to think that one of the things that you spoke about in the film, it's horrible to think that this saved a lot of sexual assaults. Yeah. But at the same time, there were things going on behind these doors that were against people's wills. And did that get seen or noticed the way that it should? And there was just both those elements. So I found that whole topic very disturbing and fascinating at the same time. How did you feel like discovering that? Because you must have discovered a lot on the journey as well.
Oh, yeah. I think I spoke about this in the Q&A a little bit yesterday, but I think I knew nothing about sex work and prostitution. I knew what everyone else did. And I didn't know that there was even a movement of sex work is work, and that a lot of sex workers want to have it decriminalized so they can have their choices and their money isn't with the government and they're not being regulated and they're all these things. But at the same time, I was saying yesterday, it's interesting. I think sometimes I'll get questions in the audience being like, how do you feel? Like, isn't this like how horrible these women lived this way? And like prostitution is so bad. And it's so not black and white. Like something like pro-life and pro-choice, where I can absolutely say I'm pro-choice. This is so much more gray area, complex. It's like it was difficult, when discussing the history of these girls, because Heather very much was like a historical, unbiased perspective. She was like, yes, like you could say that this did, sort of help protect some women in town, but she was like, of course there were sexual assault and rape, just like everywhere. So to blanket statement say, which was like Holly, the woman who spoke at the end, who wasn't for the brothels, to say it was amazing all across the board, like that's not the case. And I think what's to me that reflects this topic of sex work just in general pretty well. I think there are people who believe their prostitution should be completely illegal. But then there are those sex workers who are like, I want to do it. Like I want to work, I want to dance for a living. I want to be a prostitute for a living and take a job. So for me, and still, I don't know where I fall on the issue, just because like I want to keep educating myself, and it's such an under discussed topic. But if you go look on a bunch of movements behind it, so I think I came away from it being like, I talked to a bunch of the clients at first, and I was like, this is crazy. They're so comfortable. And it wasn't until later that I talked to Holly, who had the alternative perspective on it. And from her, I kind of realized, wow, this has such a personal effect on her. She had such a personal story. And I think something that isn't explained in the documentary is one of the men who says, you wouldn't get the young girls pregnant. He's her ex-husband, and he is the one who she had her child with.
Oh, okay.
Focused on in the documentary, but basically you have these two people who had such opposing views that were married. Now together. And I think I wanted to just accurately reflect how it affected both sides, and I think that is in a larger scale what's happening as well. So it's just, even talking about it now, it's so hard for me to be like, oh yeah, like I come down on this side or I come down on this side, because you're constantly learning things and talking to people, and they're giving their perspectives, and it's changing.
I think that's the most amazing. I mean, that's what I found fascinating going on the journey of watching your documentary. Because I mean, I started being that sort of angry at these, creepy old men just going in there. Like that was how I was feeling. I still don't, like those people that did it in that, did that. But then again, you really showed the perspective of like, just that everyone's got a different story. These women have all got different stories. When you showed the the women that were part of these communities, and also the madams. I found those pictures so powerful, and I wanted to see everyone's stories. I was like, oh my goodness, this is like a TV series. Like they all had such powerful presences, and just you could tell that everybody had a different story behind their thoughts in that moment. And did that strike you? Because it really struck me of those, I just seen the pictures of them, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think when I first saw those pictures, I was like, oh wow, because I was putting a lot of faces to names that I had heard about. And Dolores, who's focused on, who's one of the most famous madams there, like she's spoken about by everyone, right? Beloved by everyone. And you hear these stories and then you put a face to the name. And also, you know, there was the guys that I spoke to. I mean, I had like 15 hours of footage too, and I cut it down. So the interview was long, and I would go back and forth. So it's like, you know, one of the guys said, yeah, there was one of the girls was in Pi-Phi at the University of Idaho, and she would come down here in the summer and make money so she could support herself for school. So there you have a sorority girl, and you would never really think, oh wow, a sorority girl in the 60s and 70s. Like you think, you know, blonde, all pink outfit, like perfect little, you know, situation. And here you have a girl who's, you know, a sex worker who's supporting her way. So I think it really expanded my, you know, view of who these women were and where they were coming from and why they were doing it. And, you know, some had sad stories. Some, you know, they would travel from Spokane and Washington to Idaho around, and then others just did it in the summer. So it really varied, and it was crazy to hear the different kinds of women. And, you know, a lot of the women still lived in the town after and married locals. So there were some women who, you know, lived there afterwards and had kids, and like the madam's grandkids went to the local school. It was pretty crazy to just see how it affected everyone in the town.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it was a very different time as well. I mean, it's, you know, it's amazing how we speak about things then to where we are now. I mean, it's very different. What for you as a documentary filmmaker? I just thought you just captured this world so fantastically. Like, what's your, you know, kind of, firstly, how long did it take you to film this? I'm so curious. You had 15 hours of footage. What was the kind of length in which you spent filming this?
I think we were there for like 4 days, and we would just
4 days
interview 10 to 5 every day. And like, I mean, our interview with Dave, one of the men, was like 2 hours long, because we would sit and he'd be having like lunch at this restaurant. And so we did it in 4 days, and I originally was cutting it for a website, and that actually didn't work out. And as it unfolded, I had pitched the Oasis Bordello Museum, and that was like an easier pitch. And then I was like, oh my God, this is so much deeper than I thought it would be. And so it turned into, like, I fortunately got to make it into my own film eventually.
Oh, great. I love how it evolved that way. That's amazing. Yeah.
And so, you know, they were sort of like, oh, we don't know if this fits our format anymore. And I was like, totally fine. And so I got it back, and I shot it, and I would go back, like I would get B-roll, you know, like, cause I had gone in the winter. So then I would travel back, and I went for, like, they had a festival there, and I went and stayed for a couple of days, and went and got B-roll. So it was like a 4-day interview process, but I think it took me like 2 years or a year or two to finish, just with like tough to edit. Like I was saying, my first short doc I rated was about like a mermaid amusement park, and like it didn't have such complex undertones, right? Where this, I was like, I think I might have chosen one of the more difficult, unknowingly, topics possible to sort of approach, because it's not discussed. I didn't want to come down on either side, and I wanted them to tell their stories, but it took me a while, I think, because it was such an interesting topic that I had to just approach very carefully. So the edit took a long time.
I mean, I really think it was amazing. I think you don't often get so many very different points of view from a small town where everyone is living together still. Yeah. So it was just amazing to sort of, you know, get everyone's kind of different perspective on it as well. And you know, the thing is that, I mean, goodness me, there's so much depth in there. Like I just kind of, you know, there's so many stories within the story, you know, that just seem fascinating. What is next for you? What's next on the horizon for you, Delaney?
I have been focusing a lot on writing, and I actually write comedy, and I have a couple scripts in development. So I've been doing that, but I do, in terms of directing, I want to go out and shoot a short doc soon. And I sort of have a couple things in mind that I'm trying to like email and see how accessible the subjects are and the places. But I think I do really love focusing on like Americana film. Like you said, I love little towns all over the US that are so different. And if I can and you know, meet people and tap into a subculture or a place that I haven't seen before, I like to do that, because again, I think like what I liked about Wallace was I was able to sort of say, here's this town with this peculiar situation, but here's how it reflects on a larger topic. And anytime I'm able to do that, I think, so I have two ideas that I'm toying with right now, and I'm sort of like reaching out, but I do want to make a short doc, because this I shot like 3 years ago now. So I really want to get back out and be able to film something now that the world is sort of slowly but surely, hopefully turning to normalcy, and then people are back on sets. I think, you know, the great thing about doc film is, as you know, is you can do it pretty scrappy and thin. So, I mean, to be able just to go out with someone with a DP or me and start shooting would be great. But that's sort of what I would like to do next is get back on set and start shooting stuff again, because I haven't really done it during quarantine.
No, absolutely. And I love that you've got a sort of in focus on, you know, Americana and these small little towns, because this country's so big and there's so many different ways of living in this country. And it's just fascinating to sort of watch when, you know, you just see a different world to the world that you're living in the same country. And I think that's why we can't always agree on with the same thing with each other, because, you know, it's so varied. It's insane. So, you know, but listen, I'm so happy that you brought this film to us, but I am just like, I would love to just even be a little bird's eye view on one of your sets, because I just feel like you've got such a great balance in just the way you articulate a story. I'd love to know if anybody in filmmakers out there that, you know, would looking to follow in your footsteps, to what advice do you kind of go by that helps you on your journey as a filmmaker?
Sure. I think with documentary in particular, I think the most important thing, and anyone would say this, is just absolutely gaining trust with the people you're interviewing. And I would say, you know, if you have a piece that you can show them too, that always helps, because I think people are hesitant. People don't know if they've sat in front of a camera. Is this going to be like a reality TV show where they're going to cut together all the worst things I said? And I think like being able to show them a piece that you've done before, where you're like, here's how I interview people and I would never do this to you, that also helps you too, because I think people do fear that you're going to make them look really bad just to sort of, you know, get some like crazy story. And I think like the most important thing for me is gaining trust, because that's how you get the best interviews and the most compelling stories, and sitting down with them first and having a conversation, asking them about themselves and making sure that they feel totally comfortable. I think that is the most important thing to me, and what I've learned from other people as well, is just having, you know, ingrain yourself. Don't make them feel like you're some outsider coming in to say like, oh, look at these people, look how they live. Like, isn't this crazy? Because that's what they fear, right? If you have something different, most of the time you're doing a documentary, it's something so peculiar and interesting, you don't want to make them feel bad about that. You want to make them feel like you're here to hear them out and hear their story, and you just want to make sure that they feel comfortable and supported no matter what they're going to say and who they are. I mean, I've interviewed people that I adamantly disagreed with, but like the ability to hear them out, I think the most important different opinions, so you're not, you know, shouting into an echo chamber at all times.
Well, I love, I love that you mentioned that, because there was several times I was trying to feel it from your perspective, and I was like, oh, poor Delaney's got to go through some of these conversations. Like, I was just uncomfortable for you, you know, because it, you know, again, you like you said, but there's a certain dynamic that you want to have as a documentary filmmaker. And I love that the most important thing is that trust. Like you said, it's everything. And so never underestimate that element as a documentary filmmaker, obviously. So, well, listen, I can't wait to the next world that you take us to. Please keep, you know, making more, and like, you know, thank you for giving us this, you know, snippet of this world, and you I love your style. So thank you very much, Delaney. Thanks for bringing it to New Filmmakers LA.
Yes, thank you, Danny, and thank you, New Filmmakers. And yeah, it's amazing to talk about it. And thanks again for having me on.
Awesome.